And at 10, moisture sensitive. One of the things that I find to be the absolute dumbest thing about not only these damned suits, but also the FNAF series in general, is how stupid it is that the Springlock mechanisms inside the Springlock suits fail with moisture. Sure, it explains why William gets spring-locked because the room was dripping and whatever, the ceiling was leaking, and it makes everyone confused with Crying Child because he was crying. Despite that not being a Springlock failure, everyone thought it was because he was crying and, you know, moisture. But in actual practice, that is a horribly flawed mechanic. Like, if me breathing and sweating is going to make the metal bits snap on me, why would I do it in a hot robotic suit? That seems like a horrible and stupid idea. Like, yes, okay, put me in a hot and sweaty environment that gets me killed if it gets wet. That's not a liability at all. I get sweaty wearing my freaking Doctor Strange costume, okay? Imagine a giant suit full of metal, okay? That would also be heavy as hell to walk around in too, only making the sweating worse. In at 9, designer. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these Springlock suits were made with pure intentions. By William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that's not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby and her comrades, we know that they were made in order to kill, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to assume that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. But honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks, you get me? And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal, bars, cogs, gears, and chains and more into the same space as your body would be made with pure intentions, you should stop watching these videos and go to a therapist. Seriously. I have a number. In at 8, no bonus. The Springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way enough for a human to fit inside is nuts. And while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers or miles, whatever, per hour in huge metal death boxes, so we can't necessarily complain about it. And while yes, they have their faults, there is nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and suit. That's an incredible feat of technology, and I'm sure they play into it with the marketing. Like, I mean, we hear the Foam Guy tapes from FNAF 3 talking about these things, okay? And he never mentions a bonus or anything like that for you risking your life with one of these damn suits. And even if you end up getting Springlocked, there doesn't really seem to be any compensation package for your loved ones. Hell, if you die, you may not even get your severance. Actually, maybe that's why they do it. Your family can file a lawsuit since, you know, you died on the job, but that's a lengthy court battle against a massive company with a serial killer who has yet to be caught at the front lines. It's not really gonna do much good for your fam. So the fact that you don't get a bonus if you get in one of these suits, let alone get spring-locked, no thanks. It's a red flag. Swipe left. And at 7, Kelsey. The New Kid from 1:35 AM is a story from Third Fazbear Fright's book. The story revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts. They aren't really popular, you know, they aren't cool. But when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they try to make a new friend. Despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone in the school, over time Devin grows jealous of Kelsey, because, you know, he's adored and loved by everyone in the school. So, in an act of revenge, or to maybe try to gain control over him, Devin hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. I guess to try to humble him, I guess? I don't know why you thought that this would be a good thing, but obviously the plan goes horribly wrong because it's a FNAF book. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks ended up failing, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, causing all of the blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devin and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but then something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime to make sure Kelsey's body is still there. He sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth because he doesn't think about fingerprints, and snap. The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devin gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out. But not before seeing a body in the suit, with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. I don't know, okay? Could this be a character that we have yet to see in the games? Probably not. It's just a character in the book, alright? This doesn't happen in the games, okay? It's a myth. This is just a book thing, okay? Stop. And it's 6, unintentional. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these Springlock suits were made with pure intentions by William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that is not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made. And considering the abilities of Baby, at the very least, we know that these were made in order to kill. We know that that was a thought in his brain, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to think that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. More on one of them in a minute, but honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks. And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal bars, cogs, gears, and more into the same place your body would take up, was made with pure intentions, then you need therapy more than I do, okay? I have some numbers you can call. Especially when a normal animatronic and then a suit for your employees would be cheaper and less likely the focus of a lawsuit. Speaking of which, halfway through into number 5, liability. The Springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way with enough room for a human to fit inside is insane, and while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers an hour in huge giant metal death boxes, so maybe we can't really complain. While yes, they do have their faults, there's nothing compared to the ability to be both an animatronic and human suit. It's an incredible feat of technology, even if just absolutely the dumbest idea ever. Because it's terrifying for the same reasons that it would be in game. Someone can dress in it and pretend to be a robot, okay? It can clamp down on you at any second, and it has done so multiple times before. The Springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they did not need to end up creating, but like, I don't know, like these things are so hella deadly. Why would both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them? Especially Henry, like goddamn. Just make a separate suit for the animatronic, okay? Like make a separate suit that your employee can wear. It's the employees, the people who run your business. They make you money, so you know they don't end up dying from robotic bits replacing their normal human organic bits in a hot suit that fails when it gets moist. Sweat, breathing. Yeah, I would never get in one of those things. Even if there hadn't been an incident before, okay, that just seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I don't want to be the one whose family sues because I'm too dead to do it myself, alright? So, no. It's a myth that they shouldn't have gotten sued. And a 4, crying child. Okay, now this one's certainly gonna make people mad, but there's no way that I could do this list without mentioning the greatest debate of literally anyone yelling at me ever. The amount of people who have messaged me on Instagram or on TikTok, yelling at me in my TikTok comments or in the YouTube comments, telling me that the bite of 83 is somehow a Springlock incident bothers me to my core. I say this every time I bring it up. It's not a Springlock failure, okay? The fact that a load of people consider this to be a Springlock failure is the myth that I'm addressing. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, okay? There's no Springlocks that could have a chance of failing, since, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanisms failing to hold the robotic bits away, meaning that it snaps back into animatronic mode when a person's inside. That's why it's bad if there's a person inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanisms inside the mouth either, because that would always be in animatronic mode. Like your head, your eyes would line up with the opening of the mouth so that you could see. So yeah, that's kind of. Plus, I don't think anyone who is 7 feet tall working at Freddy Fazbear's. No, they're in the NBA. The jaw also just moves up and down, okay? Truthfully, I don't know how much of the community believes this to be a Springlock incident, because the comments are always going to be filled with more people that are against it than for it, because if you're for it, you don't really feel the need to comment about it. But it's still concerning the amount of comments I'm seeing and the amount of DMs I get on Instagram, okay? Which, by the way, follow me on if you don't hate me, because I need to get past 20. I get to 19 and it goes back down. I have to get past the 120, Paperwork. One of the worst things for the survivors after a Springlock failure has to be the paperwork that is associated with it, because goddamn, someone dying in your building is one thing. Someone dying in your building because of something in your building is another, and then add on to that the fact that they were your employee and probably forced into that suit without because of their contract, and you'll be filing reports until you have to retire. Okay, especially because one mistake on those papers means like even more paperwork, and I don't really know anyone who likes to do paperwork. Personally, I hate it, but that's also because my ADHD makes me it makes it unbearable for me, honestly. Like, it's even tough to write scripts sometimes, but I mean, eventually I have to. But like that's where my brain thrives, you know, in that stressful environment, which is not good for my health. But if it was that kind of paperwork, I would honestly just quit, because there was no way in hell that I would even want to attempt to keep my focus on that when I can just scroll through TikTok or YouTube instead. So yeah, no thanks. But ultimately, in at number 2, replaced. Oh yeah, don't forget your bones being replaced with metal ones. Yeah, like sure, there's surgery for people who need repairs or replacements, okay? I think like hip replacements are probably the most common actually. However, those have whole processes behind them to ensure a fast recovery and, you know, survival, not being infected. All of a sudden being shoved full of metal bones where normal ones used to be, that's a guaranteed infection at the very least, especially considering how, you know, your normal bones have to go somewhere else. And whether they're just crushed and then spread out inside you or just pushed out the other side, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of pain. Plus, you know, probably not alive, which I guess is a good thing, since you won't really have to deal with the intense pain for too long, hopefully. But this actually makes me think, if you replace all of your bones with metal ones, are you still you? Is this like a Ship of Theseus moment? Am I about to have like a WandaVision finale? Or like, are we just our brain? And if we are our brain, does that mean that if we have a brain transplant, do we become another person despite it still being my body? And does that mean that we're just like a brain piloting a bone mech with meat armor? Oh no, existential crisis! And finally, in at number 1, death. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? But the worst thing about a Springlock failure has to be the whole death part, right? Ignore my mumbling. I mean, honestly, okay, it's obviously not for some of you, given the whole comments thing earlier, but the only reason you wouldn't die in a Springlock suit is because you're a main character and need to be around for the story. And then you're just in agonizing pain for the rest of your life. Yeah, the only people who have survived a Springlock failure, well, confirmed, is William. So, yeah, and you know, he's like the main antagonist of the game and was only able to survive since the spirit of a victim was keeping him alive. And in the books, William also ended up getting springlocked before, but then got out of the suit, since Dave Miller, who is revealed to be William, has scars from a previous Springlock failure from before he becomes Springtrap in the books. So the only one who can ever really survive seems to be William, and he's survived it twice. Anyone else is boned, and personally, I'd rather not die by having millions of small metal bits and several dozen large ones shoved into my body, trying to replace my body. I would rather die peacefully in my sleep with Chica's hand around my throat.
Number 10. Springlock doors. Something that has come up multiple times over the course of all of these games, a question that still has yet to be answered, is how do the doors open if the power turns off, considering that they're mechanical doors? Well, what if the doors are actually spring-loaded and it's the power that holds them in place, and then when they turn off, they just snap upwards, I guess. The other strange thing in general about the doors is that they slide upwards, not sideways. That just means those straight looking sheets of metal are actually able to curl up somehow, being stored in the ceiling like a garage door, although I don't think that's what's happening, or that there is a wall directly above for that door to slide into, which would be a lot of convenient wall stacking, especially if this is a one-level building. Then it really doesn't make sense. Either way, I can only imagine that these doors would even be capable of springing open if it was the power alone keeping them shut, and that they are somehow spring-loaded to always be open, unless the power is on to push them down. That's the only way we can rationalize the way they work. Maybe this is also why our power runs out so fast as well. After all, I'm assuming it would take quite a bit of force and therefore power to keep them in place if they were spring-loaded. Number 9. Kelsey is Andrew. Kelsey is the new kid in one of the stories from Fazbear Frights, number 3, 1:35 AM. Coincidentally, I think one of my favorite books in the Fazbear Frights series. The story itself is also titled appropriately The New Kid. It centers around Kelsey, who is a new kid at school that everyone likes because he is so friendly and good looking. In the end, Kelsey ends up being betrayed by his new friends that he's made, who try to scare him by taking him to an abandoned Freddy's location and making him dance around in a Springlock golden Freddy suit, which of course malfunctions, killing him. Later on, one of the friends comes back for Kelsey only to get stuck in the suit himself and see a corpse inside that doesn't seem to match Kelsey's appearance. This corpse is noted as having black curly hair, which led many fans of the books to speculate that Kelsey is in fact the vengeful spirit Andrew, who also appears in another story later on in the book series, The Man in Room 1280 from the 5th Fazbear Frights book. In that story, the vengeful spirit, whom many believe to be Andrew, one of the spirits that possesses the Stitch Wraith, appears as a dark boy with curly hair wearing an alligator mask. With a description of his hair matching that of the corpse found inside the Springlock Golden Freddy suit, it's easy to see why people think Kelsey is Andrew. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about all of the Springlocks, so many Springlock things, so springy, so locky, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Plush Trap is from Sister Location. And what's more, might also be an older model Springlock suit? Based on what Circus Baby says about the Springlock suit we are stuck in coming from her old location, we could theorize that Plush Trap is also a Sister Location Springlock suit, especially since Plush Trap looks much older by comparison. But why do we think Plush Trap is also a Springlock suit? Well, it's interesting that in the book Fetch, we learn more about the Plush Trap animatronic, where it is implied that it can mimic the voices of other folks, something that prior to Fetch's release, only Sister Location animatronics seemed to be capable of. This is what makes us think that Plush Trap comes from Sister Location and perhaps was an older animatronic brought over from Circus Baby's previous location. While Plush Trap doesn't really fit in with the overall aesthetic of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, we do know that an older Springlock suit was also kept there. Does that mean that Plush Trap is also an old Springlock that initially was its sister location, just based on the voice mimicking? If so, how did they get to be with the Nightmare animatronics? And also, who wore the Plush Trap suits if they were ever worn, if they were Springlocks in that way? Was it designed for a shorter employee or possibly for kids to wear? Also, just to be clear, I'm not implying that that is the Springlock suit that we are in Sister Location when you're playing the game, because yeah. I don't know how tall Michael Afton is, but I don't think he's as small as Plush Trap.
And its 6 implications. Now, while the term Springlock is used in real life, it's totally different from the actual FNAF mechanism. I'm certain most of you got the whole Springlocks are real line from Springlocks and You, How Not to Die Remastered. It's a thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual Springlocks are just locks that use springs, okay? From my research, what I gathered is that a Springlock in real life is, in simplest terms, a spring lock. It's like if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks or just ends up bringing you back or quotes this page, so it's kind of circular logic, okay? You can't use evidence within the thing that you're trying to prove as proof that it is real. It's like plugging a power bar into itself. It doesn't work. You can't use the same article to prove that Springlocks are real, okay? Because they're not. At least their game form isn't. But if the Springlock failure was real, I think the implications of like all of this being real in general is like one of the worst things. You get it? Like it's definitely in the top 10. Get it? It's a little meta content joke for you because this is a top 10 list. It's in the top 10. Halfway through into number 5, comments. I've mentioned this in previous videos, mostly to explain why there won't ever be an actual real FNAF restaurant that you'll be able to walk into, and it still remains true since we're only getting a virtual diner that you can only order online. However, I think that one of the worst things still, and especially when it comes to these suits, is the goddamn comments about them. You wanna know a comment that I saw yesterday? Well, yesterday for me as I was writing this, Wednesday for you. Okay, I saw someone say that they want to be springlocked. What? Why? Why would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how messed up that is? You're saying that you want to be killed by this thing? Because there's some hotlines that you should call. Like, why on sweet heaven's earth would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how absolutely agonizingly painful that would be? That would be one of the worst things imaginable, okay? Holy sweet Lord baby Jesus W. Christ. That would be one of the worst ways to go, if not the worst way. At least like as far as like actually could happen goes, I think at least, okay? Because like a volcano would suck, but it's a bit unrealistic. It's a bad idea, okay? Stop doing this, stop saying this. Okay, talk to a doctor. And at 4, Afton. I talked about how the implications would apply to like how everything in FNAF would have happened in real life if one of these was real, but one of the worst implications would be that Afton was real. This man has caused me enough pain and suffering already. I don't need him to be like an actual person, especially considering how Springtrap would be set loose next year. and then everything after it would happen. This channel would probably be a true crime channel and not a gaming channel. I'd probably have tried proving it myself and maybe even become a PI so that I can do so. But straight up, this man has already caused me enough grief and suffering and loss and tears of pain at night in my life, and it's made me lose enough of it already to him. So yeah, him being real would just be the worst thing that I can imagine for me. However, that's only if the Springlock failure thing was also real. There are worse things for people in the FNAF universe though, not in real life, such as in at 3.
Number 3, Funtime Bonnie is a Springlock suit. Funtime Bonnie really only appears in Sister Location as an empty head. But what if there is something else going on with this animatronic? After all, there is one animatronic who we also don't get a good look at in the game, but who we are pretty familiar with by the end of it, just based on our experiences. That would be the Springlock animatronic that we are stuck in temporarily. While we never see it explicitly, we also never get to see Funtime Bonnie explicitly either. This has led some to theorize that Funtime Bonnie is said Springlock suit and is the older animatronic that Circus Baby was referring to. The only thing that seems odd is how new we'd imagine Funtime Bonnie to look, but then again, it's more likely that the animatronics at Sister Location are actually really old and have just been well maintained and possibly refurbished, and possibly, hidden away there. After all, Circus Baby's Pizza World seems to be one of the first locations, I think. This timeline is hard to keep track of, so forgive me if I'm wrong about something that has not actually been confirmed, so I guess we can't really be wrong about much. Number 2, Springlock suits were designed to malfunction. You have to wonder, when you learn how easy it is for a suit to malfunction, if the suits themselves were ever actually made with the intention of functioning in a safe manner. It seems more likely that they were made with the intention to do harm. The Springlocks can malfunction if not wound up securely and properly before the wearer dons the suit. Not winding up the springs properly can result in them simply going back to their original position, impaling the wearer. The thing that I find very suspicious is how a small amount of moisture, such as that which comes from heavy breathing or even just moisture in the air, can cause the spring locks to completely loosen. These are also suits that you'd think were intended for you to move around in, acting as the character you were dressed up as, and yet in Sister Location we are warned not to move too much, as this can actually set off the spring locks, implying either the locks were not at all secure when the suit was put on us, or that they are so temperamental that basic movements could set them off, never mind jumping around, dancing, or in general performing as the character that you happen to be dressed as, which is what I'd assume would be expected normally of an employee donning a mascot suit. Number 1. Henry sabotaged the Springlock suits. We don't really have a lot of clearly defined lore from the games that lets us know who really made all of the animatronics between William and his business partner Henry. In some continuities, it's implied that William is more the inventive one, whereas in others, William is more business savvy and Henry is more robotic savvy. It could be possible that the two were actually a little bit of both. I think that makes the most sense just based on everything we've learned about them. If this is the case, who's to say that Henry wasn't the one behind the Springlocks, and perhaps after losing his daughter, sabotaged said Springlock suits while in a vengeful state. When William, however, did not die from Springlocks impaling him, Henry had to resort to other means later down the road, like what we see in Pizzeria Simulator, with him rounding up all of the former animatronics and then burning the place to the ground. Or potentially with Henry being behind the burning down of Fazbear Fright, which also was a suspicious thing that happened, and we don't really know who's behind it, but I feel like Henry could make sense there.
In a 10-second times the charm. Could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit like we see happen in FNAF 3? In a way it's possible, and it appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described as having scars that are consistent with a Springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the books. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the Springlock suits were retired in the first place, since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the Sister Location? So is that unfortunate incident actually William? There are plenty of other people that it could be as well, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, at least for a time. But with William continuing to use the suits afterwards and putting it on like we hear in FNAF 3, and then again he ends up failing in FNAF 3 as well, it's unlikely, so no. In at 9, Golden Fredbear. One theory that I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure mostly started around FNAF 4, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp and lifeless in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't physically move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child would be the one in the Golden Freddy suit, However, we know that this isn't true based on characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night, although I guess that might not mean much, and just like coloring and size. Since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have to be, since Fredbear would have to accommodate a human plus the robot parts, and Golden Freddy wouldn't. Since, you know, Golden Freddy would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter much apparently, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then went to Burn Trap. But from the evidence, it seems like Golden Freddy is merely an illusion or a hallucination created in the mind of Michael Afton. See, our Golden Freddy was never real video for more info on that, because that proves this idea wrong. And you're all gonna be mad at me, but you know what? That video deserves more love, or at least interaction. In at 8, Elizabeth Afton. I've seen a few people asking if or assuming that Elizabeth Afton was a victim of a Springlock failure, and the truth is, she wasn't. The Circus Baby animatronic isn't a Springlock suit, since a Springlock suit in this case is defined as a suit that contains robotic parts, but uses a special mechanism that when cranked moves those robotic parts to the side so that a person can climb inside and wear the robot like a suit. The Baby animatronic isn't one of those, because there's no way to actually wear this animatronic. Baby it's just a robot, so there is no way that she could have Springlocked Elizabeth. Elizabeth is just a normal victim of her father's killing spree, which resulted in her somehow wanting to make him proud, despite him being the reason she's dead. Directly. Like, not even an, he just because he made the animatronic thing. No. Nobody else had a hand in her death aside from him. But she still wants to make him proud. I don't know, I guess Baby crushed her body and then her sanity too. Which, I mean, I'd understand. That's pretty rough.
Number 7. Kelsey is Crying Child / Cassidy. While Kelsey being Andrew could make some sense, others have speculated that the corpse found inside the suit actually belongs to Cece, Crying Child. This is obviously because of the physical description of the corpse, which has curly black hair. A lot of people coming back to that curly black hair for a lot of these theories. This description matches the appearance of Crying Child, who also appears to have black and curly or wavy hair based on what we see in the games. But Kelsey is blonde. How does he fit in? Well, it is possible that Kelsey is the amalgamated manifestation of both Crying Child and Cassidy, who perhaps both haunt Golden Freddy if in this continuity they were both victims and have decided to share possession of the animatronic. Neither of them of course was blonde, but they could be changing their appearance together, using a disguise to go out in the world and trick bullies into trusting them. Cassidy could also possibly be considered the more aggressive personality, while Crying Child could be considered the nicer side, and also might bring the masculine appearance to the table when it comes to their disguise. Because obviously Cassidy was a girl, so yeah. Number 6. Shadow Freddy and RWQFSFASXC. I think I said that all right. This theory, I believe, has been debunked, so just a word to the wise about that, but I still thought it was a pretty cool theory that existed, and I personally like the sound of it. I think it's a neat theory, hence why I'm gonna share it here with you, even though it's been discredited. But just know, we know that. The theory posits that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie were both victims of a Springlock failure. Phone Guy talks about the sister location experiencing multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, leading some fans to think that might explain the shadow animatronics we see and what exactly they are. Spirits who are attached to the suits that they died in, but were for some reason unable to fully possess them, instead becoming a shadow-like version of that animatronic. I just think it's a cool idea. I mean, shadow animatronics are so mysterious to me, so when I find cool stories that could explain how they work, their theories, I love them. Number 5. Yellow Suit. In FNAF 2 on Night 6, Phone Guy's call reveals that he is surprised you came into work at the location, as it is meant to be shut down for a while. He tells you that there was an incident that happened involving the yellow suit in the back, which many have theorized to be the Springlock suit used in the missing children incident, where 5 victims went missing. Some even think that this phone call is referring to that incident. Phone Guy claims that someone wore the yellow suit, and ever since, the animatronics have been acting strangely. Is it because they had victims stuffed into them, and possibly because those victims' souls are making the animatronics behave more aggressively because they're possessing them? I don't know, but it makes sense. Number 4. Bite of 83. We know that Fredbear was the one behind the Bite of 83 based on the minigames we see in FNAF 4, and we also know that CC was the victim of said bite and eventually died of his injuries. But what we don't know is why the bite happened. However, if you look deep into the lore surrounding Springlocks, it feels like a no-brainer here. Sorry, no pun intended, Crying Child. Sorry about that. We already know that Springlock failures have pretty much been an ongoing problem since the creation of the suits, and we also know that Springlock failures on a massive scale eventually eventually got these kinds of suits retired. So what if the bite of 83 was the major beginning of that? What if the bite happened because of a Springlock failure itself? All the clues seem to be pointing us in this direction. A technical issue is the only real explanation, as the animatronics themselves seem to have not been inherently malicious, not until they were bonded with spirits which lingered inside them, making them vengeful. And so if there wasn't a spirit in there, then we must assume there was a technical error, a Springlock malfunction.
Getting close to the end of number 3, not beefed up. The fact that these animatronics are incredibly powerful is absolutely an insane thing that nobody really seems to grasp. Like the fact that Fredbear was able to crush a child's skull, something that we've covered how crazy is. Imagine if that was an employee, okay? Like ignoring the fact that you think it's a Springlock incident or that it's a Springlock suit, the amount of power that Jaw has is a hazard for everyone who comes into contact with it. Like goddamn. And before you say anything, okay, it wasn't a Springlock failure. I don't know how many times I need to go over that. There's no Springlocks in the mouth, and they weren't active at the time. Okay? It can't be a Springlock failure. So these animatronics are just insanely powerful animatronics. Alright? Which would be explained by them being intended to kill, which also explains why it would have the power to crush crying child's skull. The way I see it, William probably wanted to use the Fredbear suit as his kill suit because, you know, Freddy's the more popular character, but then he had to change to Bonnie after, you know, his son was killed in the suit, especially considering how he saw Elizabeth end up possessing Baby, so he was probably worried that Crying Child did the same with Fredbear, so yeah, that's the way I see it. But ultimately, in number 2, Springlocks are real. Okay, you see, if I was to actually do like a cosplay of the purple guy and actually do it without it being a joke, I'd probably end up using a purple phone case, because, you know, you gotta reference the phone guy. But I don't need a Springlock crank, because those aren't actually a thing in real life. While the term Springlock is used in real life, it is a totally different mechanism from the actual FNAF thing, okay? I'm certain most of you got the whole Springlocks are real line from the Springlocks and You How Not to Die Remastered thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual Springlocks are just locks that use springs. From my research, what I gathered was that a Springlock in real life is in the simplest of terms if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real Springlocks just simply brings you back to that page or quotes that page, so there's really only one source. Springlocks, as they're used in the games, do not exist in real life, alright? That is a myth. The term is used, but it's 2 separate words instead of one, and they mean totally different things. So please stop. And finally, in number 1, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Her name was hidden for years, only being revealed in the survival logbook of all things, and then confirmed in the FNAF movie scripts that Scott ended up tossing after he talked about them on Reddit. And honestly, we don't really know much about her. We don't know how she died, but there are plenty of theories that claim to have evidence of her being a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that it would be easier that way, I don't know. Maybe she ends up possessing Golden Freddy after all, I don't know, okay? We figured that he could be a Springlock suit and then that he had like the guts removed or something like that, hence the slumped over nature as I talked about earlier. But if this was the case and Cassidy's body was in that suit, wouldn't they have found it when they were gutting it? Because like, that seems like something you'd notice. I don't know, but maybe William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. But for a suit technician, he also did, you know, get into the animatronic when it was wet, something that he was definitely smart enough to avoid. But yeah, Cassidy being a Springlock victim has very little evidence, if you can even call it evidence though, so yeah, I'm definitely gonna deem this one a myth. Light your torches, get your pitchforks, come at me in the comments section for saying that, because I know you're going to. I can't avoid it every time, but you're not gonna change the outcome of this video, alright? It's already uploaded, you can't change it, it's too late.